What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here, and this is going to be my return into the discography of the band Oasis. And I'm going to be reviewing the band's next album after my review on their fourth album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, entitled Heathen Chemistry. Heathen Chemistry is the fifth studio album by Oasis. It came out on the 1st of July 2002 by Big Brother Recordings. It's the first Oasis album to feature Gem Archer and Andy Bell. Both of them joined Oasis after the work on their touring to promote their fourth album, Standing on the Shoulder of Giants. This is the final album to feature longtime drummer Alan White. The album was produced by the band themselves, and it was the actual first time Oasis had produced any album in their discography. The album released a few singles: The Hindu Times on the 15th of April, Stop Crying Your Heart Out on the 17th of June, Little by Little and She Is Love on the 23rd of September, and Songbird on the 3rd of February 2003. The album went up to number 1 in the UK albums chart, as well as a few various countries. But reception-wise, it did get very mixed reviews. In 2017, Liam Gallagher has cited Heathen Chemistry as his least favourite Oasis album. Heathen Chemistry was actually the very first Oasis album I did buy. This was back in the time when I was just collecting random piles of CDs, when I was getting into music as a whole. And I remember this album very fondly when I was getting into more onto the different genres of rock music. And Heathen Chemistry was a record that I was bringing myself into a bit of that nostalgia type of vibe. This was way before I became a huge fan of the band. When I listened back into Heathen Chemistry, and by thinking about it bigger and further than ever, when you compare it into the sound of the infamous classics and material of Definitely Maybe and What's the Story, Morning Glory, to others like Be Here Now, Don't Believe the Truth, etc., I'll have to be brutally honest with you guys that I do think that Heathen Chemistry is, in my opinion, the weakest album in the Oasis discography. The worst part about this album is that I think, in terms of the whole record, it is very inconsistent. Not all of the tracks, for me, do match up as best onto the qualities like what the rest of the albums in the band's discography have achieved very, very well. And even though that this was the last album that we get to hear Oasis with Alan White, I think Alan White did a very good job. But in terms of the previous albums, there's just something lost about this record that does not attach with me, as I do think that some of the songwriting in terms of the non-album single tracks, where some moments that it feels forced and lackluster and underwhelming. But needless to say, this does feature the full-time later members of Gem Archer and Andy Bell, who joined Oasis pretty much from the touring to promote Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, and this being the debut for the two of them, I give them a lot of credit that they have returned into the sound of what the band used to do in their previous sound of originality in the rock sound. The opening track, The Hindu Times, opens things in a very confident way. I always really enjoyed this song. It's just as an effective, bluesy, to me like a Rolling Stones-esque type of nature. Melody-wise from Liam was really good, with a pretty strong standout chorus. I do think, though, that The Hindu Times is like not one of the strongest opening songs, not like with Rock and Roll Star to Hello, etc. But I do think that The Hindu Times is always a very good opening song to start this album. Force of Nature is unfortunately where the weaknesses starts to behold itself, because when you listen to Force of Nature, I don't know, there's something about this instrumentation where it just plods along, and instrumentally to the whole pacing of the song is incredibly repetitive, where it just does not have any hook into this track. While it has a very passable amount of higher range vocals from Noel Gallagher, this is to me one of the weakest Oasis songs, and not one of those other songs that would stand out as a follow-up track after the opening song, like from the previous albums. Hung in a Bad Place is another one that I always have an issue with. Don't get me wrong, it does have that boosting up, upbeat type of quicker tempo, but I find that the rocking edge that it does have, it does try its best. And this is where Gem Archer had decided to write this track for this Oasis record. But it's very forgettable, and again, like on Force of Nature, it's not one of my favourite tracks on this record because it doesn't strike out to me. Stop Crying Your Heart Out. Now, this is a very big Oasis ballad that has been played everywhere, especially into the commercials during the football seasons. But in terms of the song itself, this is not at all one of my favourite Oasis songs whatsoever. It does have, however, this beautiful emotional impact onto the innocence to it, and the gorgeous orchestrations, and this whole vibe about it. But when you compare it, for me, to others like Live Forever, Hey Now, to Cast No Shadow, Don't Look Back in Anger, Don't Go Away, this song to me is very melodramatic, and I just can't deliver myself to sink my teeth into Stop Crying Your Heart Out just as comfortably as a lot of the other fans do, unfortunately. Songbird, however, this is, for me, my favourite song on this album. Liam's voice on this song is wonderful. This was written for Nicole Appleton, who would later on marry Liam Gallagher after his brief marriage with Patsy Kensit. Just a basic love song, really. 2 chords. What more can you want with the gorgeous acoustic guitars? I love the sound of the piano to the accordion, which blends in just as comfortably. It sounds just lovely, and I don't care what any other Oasis fan thinks, but I think that Songbird is one of my big favourite Oasis songs, and just ballads in general from Oasis. And I just do find that Songbird does become one of the highlights across Heathen chemistry. Little by Little, this is another really strong song. This does have a very moody presence about it. It's quite melodramatic, yes, like Stop Crying Your Heart Out, but I think that this is a much better song. Vocally from Noel Gallagher is passionate. There's more of that strength into the vocal registers that sounds so consistent. And Little by Little is one of the best numbers on this album. I find the structure to be a lot stronger and terrific as well. And I always think that Little by Little is one of the other best later half periods of Oasis. But when it goes into the other tracks, like I've said about Force of Nature and Hung in a Bad Place, the filler brief instrumental of A Quick Peep is just very generic and probably all in the mind, just as pale, and not one of those other songs that does have any strong dynamics. I just don't really think that these types of songs were all that much of a specialty. I do understand that they were made with some purpose, but that's another thing about Heathen chemistry that I don't like very much, is that there's not enough that I would see as a great replayable value of these pale tracks like onto the later half and some of the weaker songs on this record. She Is Love, however, just like with Songbird, I don't mind She Is Love. Noel's voice on this song is excellent. It's got a very strong innocence feel about it, just a simple acoustic type of ballad. And I believe that this song was made around the time that Noel Gallagher had met and who would later on marry Sarah McDonald after his time with Meg Matthews. I don't think that this is that bad of a song. And She Is Love was one of the first Oasis ballads that I actually did listen to when I was getting into music in general, as I've said previously. So melody-wise, to the tone and the presentation, I think that this is a pretty good song from Noel. Born on a Different Cloud is just as a very Lennon-inspired setting as it really gets. Not many Oasis fans do talk about this track, actually. And as much as I am a Lennon fanatic myself, Born on a Different Cloud is very sweet. And it's mellow and it does resonate. And even on the tone with the delayed vocals while Liam is singing, this passion is very good here, keeping that dedication up. And I can see the appeal that this song was made in this way, and I think they did a really good job. Underrated as it really gets, just like onto some songs from the last album, like Lil James, To Roll It Over, etc. However, the album finishes in a very weak way on the final song, Better Man. This opening riff is just like as raw and as pretty jagged, like on a Jimmy Page, Led Zeppelin type of lick. And then this continuation on this kind of shuffle beat goes throughout the whole track's consistency. But as a final song, I don't really care about this song very much. Bland and devoid. So to think about the other closing tracks, like It's Getting Better Man, that song has so much balls into that very distorting nature to the psychedelic Champagne Supernova and just this pretty humorous attitude-made song of Married with Children. Better Man, unfortunately, was just not at all one of these other final tracks from Oasis that does finish things in that big climax. And that's what's really disappointing as well. After the, say, 35-ish minutes of complete silence after Better Man, the album just finishes with a forced, boring instrumental of a jam called The Cage. And no wonder that this was the longest album in the Oasis discography, involving the silence after Better Man for more than 76 minutes, which this to me was a bit of a disappointment. But despite some of these drawbacks, the album did have the highlights, and I respect this album's purpose and for what it's worth, basically. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, in my opinion, and this is just the Oasis album that I will never go back to very, very consistently. So that's personally all I would like to say about Heathen Chemistry by Oasis. Let me know what you think of this album in the comments down below. And I know that there are some Oasis fans who either love this album or actually prefer this album to the last record. And if that's the case, that's great. You can like what you like. But by thinking about the whole discography, Heathen Chemistry was just the bottom of the barrel for me in the whole history into their albums. I'm going to give Heathen Chemistry by Oasis a 6.5 out of 10. While I am a fan of Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, Heathen Chemistry just doesn't build up to a complete match like the rest of the other albums do. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.